Look into this lighter.
Yeah.
Imagine I'm holding a lighter. A visual joke with a prop I don't have for an audio medium. Perfect.
I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands. Who are you?
Who are you? Fuck.
Is that what you were going to do?
Yeah.
We all did it.
Perfect.
We're on the same wavelength, guys. You're listening to Deep Cut. On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Wilson, Ben, what would you say about the moment that we're living in on this planet?
Oh.
Yeah, we're going there.
No comment.
I didn't look at these notes, so I'm a little shocked. But I'm going to do a little improv. I'm going to do yes and yes. It's pretty shitty out there. It's pretty dire. I can get a sense of how you're going to take our answer and run into our director today.
Sorry, what's the question?
What
question?
Well, I would say that being alive right now makes me pretty anxious. And in particular, I find myself confounded not just by the perils of the environment and global conflict, but the behavior of individuals and groups of individuals that lives beyond my comprehension. And maybe this is a little bit like lib cringe posting, but I think in particular of the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, as something that is not just detached from the facts of reality, which I don't find surprising at this point anymore, but was a mass action taken based on that misunderstanding. Enter Kiyoshi Kurosawa, our new miniseries director, who, to my mind, is very focused on the tension and weakness of society, relationships, and the individuals within them. And he really focuses on how that weakness is leveraged into rupture. It's a pretty pessimist thing, but in this time in which we're living, I find it kind of cathartic to watch and somewhat clarifying to know that someone else is worried about those things.
I think about how, in relation to him being in Japan, right? Japan has had pretty surprising murder cases that always make the news, internationally speaking.
Yes.
Because I think there's a certain kind of public opinion about Japan that it's safe, it's modern. And when these things happen, they feel like such a deviation from the status quo. And I think Kyo really takes a lot from that kind of incidences. And of course, sometimes there's a few of these terrorist attacks as well in Japan. And more recently, for example, would be Shinzo Abe's assassination.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is also a huge deviation from what you would expect. And of course, a lot of things have happened since Kyo came out. And so Kyo has been relevant since it's come out, for its time as well as the time that's come after it. I also think about the deviations from the norm that happen in Singapore as well when it comes to these kind of sordid murder cases or other kinds of criminal activity that also make the news because of how unexpected they are in the situation that we're in, or rather in the environment that we are in Singapore, that also is another kind of country that is supposedly very safe. And I think those things really maybe not speak to me from Kyo, but kind of ring kind of very true for me in my context at least.
Yeah, he's very tapped into the unsettling nature of what's supposed to be a collectivist modernity and how fragile that is, and what happens when someone taps one domino within that society.
Yeah.
It's a freaky little film.
It is.
Yes. And needless to say, we are talking about Kiyoshi Kurosawa's breakout hit Cure from 1997, which is the popular pick. And in our next episode, we'll have our deep cut pick. Before we begin this episode in earnest, should you find yourself enjoying Deep Cut, please remember to give us a rating or a review and subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. This will help other new listeners discover the show And you can also keep up with us at Deep Cut Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd. And be sure to join our Discord server if you want to chat with us about Cure and everything that makes you anxious, listener. If you're a big fan of the show, we have also recently launched a Patreon. If you want to support us, that's the best way that you can. Proceeds from the Patreon go directly into the functioning of the show. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials that we've mentioned here. Okay, Kiyoshi Kurosawa is born on July 19th, 1955 in the city of Kobe. He becomes a cinephile in high school and college in the mid-70s. He talks about how American movies were the most popular ones at the time, but there was a declining new Hollywood with these nuanced, complicated dramas, and it's right before the uptick of blockbusters, in particular Jaws. Kurosawa names Peckinpah, Aldrich, Fleischer, Siegel as particular influences and directors he admires from that time because they were cutting their teeth in the 50s and using older techniques.
Those are interesting picks for him to name drop.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking about, do they track? Like, do you see their influence in his work?
The thing is, I don't even know who Aldrich, Fleischer, and Siegel are.
Yeah.
I've heard Peckinpah's name, and these are deep cut directors, I think, in a sense, from Hollywood at the time. And
Yeah.
a little bit pre like new Hollywood blockbuster style cinema.
Very much so. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that tracks for me if I just think of them in that vein.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And it's also that era of 70s Hollywood, which is something that I don't know, I'm not super familiar with because I feel like I got into like pre-70s, like 60s, and then like 80s onwards, or like late 80s. But the 70s feels like a big blind spot for me. But I don't know. It's interesting that maybe he's using that as a baseline and then sort of building his cinema on top of, I don't know, classical Hollywood conventions.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to even what he describes admiring from that time period, because he talks about the blend of those subtle dramas and the emergence of great genre pictures, or like the continuation of Westerns and the complication of Westerns that happens in the 70s. He says, quote, "The mixture of confusion and sophistication of American films of that period," end quote, was something that he admired, and that he wanted to emulate that combination.
I mean, if I think about 70s, like there's only one filmmaker I can think of that I have seen a lot of the 70s output,
Coppola?
and it's Scorsese.
Oh, yeah.
And like his big 70s movie that kind of tracks into this is Taxi Driver.
Oh,
right?
Totally. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, he doesn't name drop Scorsese, but Taxi Driver is a film very much in the same vein as Cure. I
Absolutely.
would say. It has a confusion and sophistication, and it's a messy movie. And I think when I think about Scorsese's 70s output, he doesn't have that sheen that he has in his later output, which I really like from films from this period where it's a bit scrappier and more interesting, a little bit more down and dirty. And I think Kurosawa's output has maintained most of that feel.
Really?
Maybe until maybe the last few films that he has made. He's been pretty, I think, scrappy all the way till the 2010s. Or rather, they have this feeling of not being so pristine in the way they're being made.
They're grimy.
Yeah, grimy, you know?
Really? To me, it feels like very clean cinema.
It's clean cinema,
Like,
but
even though the movies themselves feel grimy. Is that what you're saying? The movies themselves feel grimy, or the filmmaking feels grimy?
I don't think the filmmaking is necessarily grimy, but it's also not, I don't have the right word for this. Like, it's not polished, but it's that it's not done to like an exacting Netflix style, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, ish.
Where there's that kind of movie studio look.
Yes, he doesn't abide by that, but I would say that I think that his filmmaking is very measured. Like, even in this
measured,
film, it's like
for sure.
incredibly precise, measured, and I guess intentional in that sense, but not like I guess the sheen of a classic.
Yeah.
I don't know, no regular film.
Well, here maybe we can draw a line between his production design and his camera direction.
Mm-hmm.
That may be even something that maps onto the difference between tone and mood in his movies, where it's both. I kind of agree with both of you. Let's bookmark this.
But yeah, finish the bio.
So film programs at the undergraduate level in his youth were pretty rare. So he studied sociology in college, and he also started making 8mm films while he was studying at Rikyo University, and he began to attend classes on cinema taught by Hasumi Shigehiko, who was a film critic who he says was very important to his development. After school, he starts working in pink films, which are kind of softcore, and V cinema, which is this direct-to-video, low-budget Yakuza cinema. And he says, about 5 movies a year from the early 90s to around 94. At that point, the main V cinema production house he works with is going under. So he goes to a slightly larger production studio called Daiei and pitches the sequel to one of the ones that he's working on, a V cinema film. And at the same time, he also pitches Cure. And they say, let's do that first. We'll jump to Cure in a moment, but just to sort of look ahead, depending on how you cut it, it's very hard to count because he's done so many different types of film for different mediums. But let's say over 40 films is how many he's directed. He's been nominated for and/or won several awards at Cannes and other festivals. And he's influenced many other directors, particularly in the realm of horror and thrillers, including another great movie that we've covered here on Deep Cut, Parasite, from Bong Joon-ho. And I would even say Memories of Murder must be an influence as well.
Oh, yeah. Yes, definitely.
Fun fact for you two, Kurosawa taught Ryusuke Hamaguchi at Tokyo University of the Arts, where Kurosawa is a professor. Hamaguchi says that Kurosawa influenced him deeply to the point that he tries to emulate his style sometimes, especially from Cure. There's a great feature on Criterion right now, filmed by another Wes alumnus, Neo Sora, where the two have a conversation about Cure, which is great.
Definitely need to check that out.
Wait, Kurosawa and Hamaguchi? Wait, who has a conversation? Who are the two?
Kurosawa has a conversation with Hamaguchi.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's fun.
Unreal. I wish I had seen that already.
Well, you can watch it
So
before
that
our deep cut.
I can loop it in here.
Before we talk about Cure itself, and I give you a little context there, there's one quotation that I came across when I first watched Cure, like a year and a half ago, and which I keep on thinking of. And I don't exactly know how it's going to tie in, but I kind of have a hunch. So Kurosawa says, quote, "I found myself in the film business, but not because I had a particular story to tell. Fundamentally, what interests me is the nature of film itself." When I think of Kurosawa, I think not just of the fragility of society or whatever, but I think of the contagious and persuasive nature of thoughts and feelings, and those as the specific tools through which a social structure can be torn apart.
Wow. That's powerful. That's great.
Okay, so Cure. Couple of points of contextualization for this movie. During a sort of fallow period in his career before he starts getting into V cinema in the early 90s, he wasn't working a ton, and he starts to think of movies that he would make if he could. He saw, as Ben noted, murder reports, like several murder reports, where the neighbors of the murderer would say, he was a good guy, he was polite, he seemed great. I guess he was hiding his dark impulses all along. And Kurosawa objects to this. He supposes, what if something triggered an otherwise good person to do something heinous? So that's sort of the idea jumping off point, but there's some major thematic considerations which I think we should hold in mind as we talk about this movie. One is Kurosawa as a sociologist, which is what he studied in undergrad. He says, quote, "I believe that individuals change when something around them changes. And if it's a drastic change, then the character, appropriately, changes drastically as well." End quote. I think that this idea of the conflict between someone and their social context and the individual being subjected to the whims of the social context shows up in everything in this movie, from the space to the blocking of characters to the title, and especially in this dichotomy that is set up between Mamiya, the lunatic, and Takabe, the citizen. There's also the movability of core identity. Kurosawa says, quote, "The word identity has become a part of Japanese culture, but its true definition, I don't understand what it means. Does identity really exist? Does anyone really have an established identity? End quote. So in addition to being molded by your context, there's, per Kurosawa's belief, no core true self, and that we operate under the belief and kind of on the system of trust that everyone in a society has a core self and has an understanding of who they are and their place. Kurosawa also talks about his particular generation in a way that's useful. So he talks about how the older generation in Japan was more sure of their political beliefs and ideas and roles in society, and that the younger generation has faith in their hobbies and interests without the realm of politics, a more individual understanding of things. And his generation is directly in between those two, a tear between social obligation and individualism. And to me, something that I want to bookmark and come back to is, does this sound like our generation to you both? And then I think last big thing is romantic relationships. Kurosawa talks about how he often pivots his movies on a husband and wife relationship because that is a fundamental social unit upon which society is built, and that is something that is completely fraught, and you can wake up one day and not know who your partner is, ostensibly the person closest to you. In addition, there's hypnotism and persuasion and the very nature of film itself, as he said in that quotation from earlier. But what I'm aiming to do here is just create a menu of thematic explorations for us. So what I'd like to ask is, how did you first encounter Cure and or Kurosawa? What's your relationship to him?
How many Kurosawa films have you guys seen? Just wondering at this point.
I've seen 4 and 2 shorts. 4 plus 2 shorts.
I probably have seen the most of his features at this point.
You definitely have. I've only seen Cure and the Deep Cut Pick.
I think I don't even know how I got into watching Kurosawa, but I decided that it was time to figure out about the Kurosawa I know less about. And I was like, all right, let me watch some Kiyoshi Kurosawa. And I think I started with Kyo, but I don't really recall. I might have seen Wife of a Spy first, which I think is very boring. But I just learned like right now that it is also a TV series. So if it's a TV series cut down for a movie, I'm gonna give it a pass and say that's probably not gonna work out. I started watching a few more Kurosawas, or rather, I will be seeing more as well between this episode recording and the next one. And I love a workhorse director, man. I love a director with output, man, because that's always the best, because it's not this like director with a precious oeuvre kind of like thing where it's just like, I'm just going to make movies and some of them will be duds and some of them will be incredible. And I'm sure that that's his career path essentially. But even when you watch the average or the duds, you can always see what he's interested in. And I find that very fascinating. And I saw Retribution last week. And Retribution kind of is a sister film to Cure because it has a very, very similar shape of film with Cure. And I think maybe the difference kind of is that Cure is maybe better because Cure is so elusive and obscure and strange. Whereas maybe with Retribution, it's a little more concrete, even though it's also dealing with less concrete things. It also seems to be more about environment, like physical environment, like the decay of infrastructure and how that relates to social structures and then how that causes things to happen. It feels very similar, and I think that even the story shape's very similar. And I think seeing that, I was like, okay, you know what? Kurosawa has made so many films, and he has these fallbacks, but it just means that he's really interested in these things. And you telling me that he majored in sociology was like, of course. It makes so much sense. And the thing I love about him is that his synopses sound like B movies, but he doesn't approach them in any way like you would expect.
That meld of genre and other nuance.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the way he thinks and like what he's interested in and the way he approaches what seems like very sensational material in always somewhat surprising ways. Yeah, but I freaking love Cure, man. Cure is a masterpiece. Like, it's kind of boring, but also amazing. Like, it's kind of like my takeaway after rewatching it today. I was like, it's a little slow, but it's like amazing in what it's doing in that space, you know, and in that time.
It's doing so much too.
It is. It really is. It's so impressive.
What about you guys?
I started watching Kiyoshi Kurosawa. The first Kurosawa film that I saw was Pulse back in 2020. And I think it sort of like left a mark on me, but I guess not, I guess, big enough to sort of dive down a rabbit hole at that time. And then I sort of slowly started watching here and there, like To the Ends of the Earth, and then Cure, which I was like super blown away by. Even though like Ben is talking about this sort of workhorse mentality, and like this sort of director who just makes so much, from the ones that I've seen, I feel like I get a similar feeling from them. A similar like off, like my stomach churning, like this is like not right kind of feeling. And this sort of fear that even if he's like directing a scene that goes by normally, I always have this fear that someone's gonna act unexpectedly, like they like time and time again do in Kiyoshi Kurosawa films, and like do something that will like just haunt me and my nightmares for like weeks to come, because that is like literally what happens when I watch Kiyoshi Kurosawa movie. I'm just like thinking, well, I'm always like mindful of like where knives are in movies, but that's just that's just
That's like me in real life.
my man loves his knives.
It sure
He loves his
does.
knives. But I think there's something so like incredible that we have such a consistent director that's sort of tapping into our societal fears and sort of using like relationships or like societal dynamics and sort of making them sort of like play-doh for him. Like he's just thinks that like he thinks that they're so malleable, and I think when he changes things in ways that you don't think are like humanly possible, the outcomes that you witness on screen is sort of like, I don't know, nightmare like nightmare fuel. It's like that's what it is. It's like it's sort of trying to bring to the surface what you most fear about the people around you or yourself. And I think that's incredible because I don't think that many other directors do that. Like I can't even like name, like you think of other horror directors that sort of do this, but I don't think no one does it as cleanly and consistently as Kurosawa, and Cure is sort of the top tier definition of this. Yeah, I can't wait to talk about this movie because I think it's fantastic. I think it's perfect. I think both lead performances are so killer and complement each other so well, but also sort of the cast of supporting performers that Mamiya sort of affects through the course of the film, and you see them sort of waver in and out of being effective and not effective, and it's like it's trippy, it's magnificent.
Perfectly said. Yeah. It's very disquieting, to borrow a word that Ben used in his review of License to Live. Briefly, I first watched Kurosawa's Pulse in the summer of 2022, and you can hear my immediate reaction to it in our summer 2022 diary episode. And yeah, was very taken by it, very affected and unnerved. And then Cure, I think the first time I watched it was a little bit over a year ago. I didn't fully get it, and it has opened up for me on this rewatch. Quickly, a summary: in Tokyo, there's what seems to be a string of serial murders committed by random citizens, in which the victim has an X carved into their chest, severing both of their carotid arteries, and the killer is always nearby and always admits to it, and they seem to have been confused. They thought it was, quote, the natural thing to do, unquote. So investigating this is Detective Takabe, who has a wife, Fumie, who perhaps has some mental illness or confusion, but also might just be a kind of constricted housewife at home. And they have a very strange relationship. Quickly, Takabe uncovers a man named Mamiya, like the camera company, who is persuading the killers in this string of murders to take those actions somehow. So let's get into it.
Where do we start? What do we talk about?
I think we start at the start. Because that opening scene in which Fumie is meeting with her psychiatrist and
she's
talking about
reading
Bluebeard,
Bluebeard.
and he's taking notes in German.
I don't know much about Bluebeard. What's the Bluebeard connection? What's the thematic resonance here? I mean, he can't be putting Bluebeard in this for no reason, right? Let's do a quick dive into Wikipedia. Real fast, we'll cut all this out. A wealthy man that's in the habit of murdering his wives. Oh yeah, Bluebeard.
Oh,
He like kills his wives and stuff. I can't really remember.
he's just like a serial killer. Or he kills one wife. Like
He keeps
he's
on
just
kidnapping
one.
women, right? And eventually his daughter kills him.
There's a woman that finds like a room and then she looks into it and it's all of the previous dead wives.
Oh,
Something like that. Yeah.
I think I clocked that this time because I already knew that there was something up with her memory, or memory was like a theme. So I was like, oh, okay, we're starting this early. But it is a really strong and bold introduction that sort of just the next few scenes sort of really amp that up until like the title sequence, which is so awesome.
yeah. It's interesting to me that it starts on Fumie because what at first seems to be the most grounded scene in the movie quickly slips into Takabe's subjectivity, which increasingly unravels the fabric of the film itself. By the end of the movie, it's kind of unrecognizable, or reality is unrecognizable. But I think it's pointed in this investigation of like relationships and male to female dynamics that the movie gets its footing in the scene with Fumie first, and then throws that all away with a very brutal murder scene. How would you guys describe the tone of this movie?
It's extremely mundane and stark, is what I would say. Like the thing that I find really fascinating is that it's so sensational, but his treatment of it is so distant and kind of detached until he isn't, until he becomes completely subjective. But then it's like, okay, most of the time you're like, let me just plant the camera here and I'm just going to pan around. People are just going to talk. And it's like, he plays so many things out in wide shots, in conversations, and it just keeps going until he decides to go in. But most of the time, he doesn't even go in at all. It feels like he's treating this so sensational thing with so much detachment. But even then, by the end of the movie, nothing really is answered as well. That it's not even like, I would say, objective in that sense then, where it's purposefully you just don't know anything. Like you can't answer these questions. It's just like, let me present to you what's going on, but I don't know what's going on. Yeah.
If one of the core anxieties of the movie is the collapse or like the fallibility of society, then maybe it makes sense that it's so gosh darn confusing because you want things to be sensible and logical.
I think about the Fumie thing because this time I was watching it and the first scene came out and I was like, who is this person? I don't remember her. And I had forgotten that that's actually the wife. Because I remember there was a wife, but I didn't recognize her. And then I was like, why would you start with the wife? Like, why is that important? And then I was trying to figure out things as I was watching it the second time. Because I think the first time I watched it, I was basically like eyebrow raising emoji the whole movie. Until the end, I was like, shocked face. It was how that ended. I was like, what the heck is going on? And even on my second watch, I kind of was in the same zone. And I was thinking, oh, is this like some implication that, because Fumie also has a memory issue, that she is a parallel with Mamiya, who has a serious memory issue. But then also no, because then he's also parallel with other characters like Takabe himself. So it draws these connections, but it never definitively is like, oh yeah, this is the connection I'm trying to make. I'm trying to say this. No. It's just let me throw everything in the pot. And this is all really weird, and I can't explain it. No one can explain it. So it's interesting because as a genre film, it's a detective movie that doesn't show much process at all. It shows things that you do as a detective, but not the process as you link from one thing to the other, if that makes sense.
Let's talk about that linking from one thing to the other too, because I think even the way that this movie jumps from scene to scene is unusual for a detective movie. I'd say that normally for a detective movie, especially like some of the noirs that Kurosawa cites, he talks about how the detective does not change typically across the course of the movie, that they are a continuous force that goes through the process, investigates, and finds the answer, and crucially, our range of narration is very much so tied to them. We're not seeing information that they're not privy to. But that's not the case here. There's a strong authorial hand in moving us from scene to scene and sort of choosing what we learn when. The shape of the movie is like we learn more about what Mamiya's doing, and then once we sort of have the full picture, it starts to like crumble as we now narrow in more and more on Takabe's experience and stay with him as he's losing his grip.
Yeah. Well, I think if you sort of did make this as a detective movie, I think a lot of the firepower of the story of like finding Mamiya, it's over by halfway through. He's already captured like halfway through the film. But so then I think that decision to do that and have Mamiya be accessible to Takabe and the rest of the police force, but that not only be a good thing for the detectives, but also it is a good thing for Mamiya because he can get further into their heads. So I think acts like to the outside looks like a detective film, but it's definitely much more of like a psychological thriller for me that is made in this really, like Ben was saying, a very cold and calculated kind of way, but with the flashes of subjectivity sort of making big like marks within the film.
Agreed. It's like most detective movies are trying to get to the bottom of what happened and then do some why at the end. But here we know pretty much what's happened by halfway through the movie.
And Takabe himself has an idea. Like he latches onto the hypnotism thing quite early as well.
Yeah, that's true. It becomes a question of why then morphs, because the reality of the movie becomes so questionable, it becomes a fundamental what question by the end, which is almost more disconcerting. Like, what actually is this?
Like, what is the question is also kind of a question.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, why? I guess I can ask the why, but is that going to help me explain how this works? Like, okay, it's hypnotism, but like, how? He's not even asking him to do anything, you know what I mean? It's just happening because he's so freaking annoying. Like, is that the explanation? That makes no sense.
Well, to me, then it's less a question of like how. Like, I remember on my first viewing being kind of disappointed by the explanation that it was mesmerism and hypnotism. Like,
but see, I don't even think it's an explanation. It's not really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. The more interesting question is what has tilled the soil to be fertile and so susceptible to hypnotism? Like, what are the social conditions that have made people so easily suggestible to kill people in this brutal, horrible way? Like, what is it about this context that has made it so awful? So what are the things working here that make people susceptible to Mamiya's suggestions and questions?
I think there's a suggestion. I think if I want to try and deconstruct it, because I think maybe this time I was thinking more about, okay, what are the similarities between the victim/murderers?
Yeah.
Right? The ones who are made to kill. And the interesting thing is that there's always something a bit off about the comparison between them, because sometimes it's a loving relationship, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's barely a relationship. And so it's hard to tell, like, are they necessarily just acting out the things that were hidden with them? Or is it sometimes just something else? Or is it maybe the whole thing is just a commentary about the fabric of society being compromised?
Yeah.
And it does, you know what I mean? So like there's just no easy way to pin it in terms of the way he characterizes all these victim murderers/victims.
On this viewing, I was thinking about the occupations of those victims/murderers. It's a businessman, a teacher, a cop, a doctor, and a detective. Takabe in the end.
And also the psychiatrist as well, right? Technically, Sakuma.
Oh, yes.
I mean, he doesn't get to do anything, but he's also technically in that as well.
Yeah. And you could argue that other people are sort of in on it as well, like maybe Fumie's psychiatrist, it's suggested.
And a waitress.
And the waitress. I think these are all positions, whether white collar or blue collar, they're all occupations that in some understanding, some more self-apparently than others, are nurturing or doing something to aid the social context.
I think that works for everybody except for the businessman.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Economy is people too. I'm kidding, by the way.
Businesses are people. They are.
I think it's interesting. I found that interesting as well because they're all supposed to be like people who help other people in society, and sort of what Mamiya does is sort of he comes, and how I'm seeing it is that Mamiya comes to them and sort of teases out their sort of like their dark evil wants and sort of releases. I think what he does is he releases a barrier that of a like an evil want. So I think like the seed is always comes from them, because I think he says this to one of his victims. He's like, all the things that are inside me are outside, so therefore I can see what's inside you, because what's inside me is already empty. After that scene, I think it became very clear to me that what he was doing to his victims.
Now, Kurosawa would disagree with you because he talks about how it's not like an inherent thing in people. It's that people can so easily switch if something is wrong around them.
That there's a malevolent force that can infect you.
Yeah. Where do you guys land on this? Wilson, do you agree with... It sounds like you're leaning more towards the idea that it's within us all along.
Yeah, well, I think like if the one where he like talks to the doctor, right, and he's like, "Oh," I think he starts talking about men, right?
Yeah.
Because another place in the one with the teacher, he's like, "Oh, tell me about your wife." But I think I don't know. It's just interesting to me I guess the direction of choice that Mamiya decides to lead them in, and I think that also that quote earlier where he was like, I can see what's inside you, and his sort of like mind reading capabilities suggests that he uses information about people to sort of lead them to killing them. I don't want to go against the director of the fucking movie, so
I mean, the thing is, okay, even if we say that, okay, there maybe isn't an evil force within each person, even if there was a malevolent force that's infecting you, the point here is that all humans are capable of evil acts. Like, just capable, whether you want to or not. And so this malevolent force just makes you do the thing, whether it's the thing that you were going to do or not. Because obviously for all of them, they don't feel anything when they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just something that they are able to do. So maybe here it's just about how Mamiya as a force is able to just get people to do things that they're capable of, which are bad things.
He's a life coach.
It makes me think of,
yes, he is.
random tangent, he feels like Mr. C.
Oh my God. Yes.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
He's just this force. He's just a force.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wilson's just staring at us
Who's Mr. C?
wide-eyed. Who is Mr. C?
He is a person in Twin Peaks: The Return.
Oh.
And essentially he is
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk more about that another time.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we will. Mr. C.
Ben, I so see what you're going at. I agree.
I think it also makes sense because if you think about Twin Peaks is about evil in a like American suburban ideal, maybe you could say, or like idea. And
Yeah.
there is a kind of idea about the safety of Japan, about the safety of modern society.
Yeah.
And then what happens when that is broken by the introduction of something that you just cannot explain? You know, what does it do to people and what does it look like? And I guess rather than thinking about the mechanics of what Mamiya is doing, it's more just like the force is not what you think it's going to look like. It's not going to be this like obvious mustache twirling villain type that's going to put things in the water to make everyone crazy. It's going to be a guy that just irritates the shit out of you. That's it. Yeah. And I freaking get it.
It's going to be annoying people.
It's just annoying.
Yeah.
It's just an annoying guy, you know? And I think like this guy really gets on my nerves and like I get it.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah, I totally
Wow,
get it.
Ben.
Like not like I get that he annoys me. Is he gonna annoy me enough to like randomly kill people? No, but I get like what he's like how unsavory he is. That it just makes me think this guy's so annoying. If you tell me he's hot, Wilson, I'm scared. Just it feels like you're going there.
took the words right out of my mouth. I was like, oh, 30% of the reason why this movie works for me is because he's so good looking.
What if Takabe and Mamiya just kiss? It doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah, exactly. Why not? Like, I feel like I just like could not stop staring at him. He's so gorgeous.
Oh my god.
That's hilarious. I'm like, this guy is so unkempt. He's got this like gait that like just annoys me.
Like a messy hair,
You know, it's like, and then he's like, feels like
mousy face.
I can't. I don't know how that makes you feel about you, Wilson. He's gonna fix you, dude.
Yeah, he will.
Well, if those are sort of the kind of big ideas, I'm curious, like, what are the moments from this movie that stand out to you, or things that feel like synecdoches of the whole project? Like those essential components of this movie that matter to you, in addition to Mamiya's attractiveness.
Honestly, Kurosawa's handling of every scene is something that is so impressive to me. There are so many, like, I guess, individual scenes that really stand out to me. And there's also a lot of brief moments. Like, I guess there's a murder that we see in like 3 quick successive shots with
Oh, the doctor one?
the doctor one where you start with a guy jumping out of a window and then you see the open window and then you see his body on the ground.
That's the teacher.
The teacher. Yeah, the teacher
First one.
Yeah, that one early on. And I think that's just like it's a sort of inconsequential kind of scene. But I think when handled in that speed and sort of relaying information that fast and in that way was so bold to me. And then also when I think Mamiya was starting to get into Takabe's head with the quick cuts out to the monkey and like sort of the messing with the edit in that kind of way with like just few frame cuts like back and forth that was really cool. And I think Kurosawa just consistently is someone that loves to just try things with the medium or like just mess around a little bit more than I guess other directors. So I really enjoyed all those moments and the long takes. There's so many great long takes here.
Yeah. I really like that because of his detached style, where he just kind of does a simple pan around the room kind of style, which I really like.
Mm-hmm.
But he has enough different choices within the film that it never gets too stale. And when he changes it, it's always for a good reason. Like when he goes from that kind of white two shot or whatever to a short reverse shot, there's always a choice. It always goes in on a very important, and he likes to use those where they almost looks like they're looking in the camera type of short reverse shot, or when he goes subjective. Like I think about Sakuma's dream sequence when he's just talking to Takabe. I just saw that like a few hours ago. So that was like, whoa, like, because he hasn't really done that where like somebody enters a dream sequence in the middle of a freaking conversation.
And you think it's going to a different scene.
Yeah, you thought you were in a different scene. You're not. You're still in the same scene. And then it's like, what the heck is going on?
You're still in this moment.
Yeah. So that was really fascinating. And like that slow motion and sound design and then like seeing freaky things. That's really good. And I think about that first scene, and actually every scene with Mamiya before he gets caught is really interesting because we talk about the narrative range, and it's very challenging to juggle 2 characters. And it's also very challenging to introduce so many freaking people.
Yeah.
And he introduces so many different situations, right? You have the first time you meet Mamiya, it's like, what the heck is going on? Like, you thought it was a cop movie. No, it's not.
On a beach.
It's just like, here's a guy. And then let's learn about these 2 people that are going to die in 5 minutes, but like establishes relationship a little bit. Or with the doctor, like he has to set up all these different characters and relationships, or the police as well in the police box. And he is a fan of this more kind of expanded range. I've seen that in other films as well. And I find it very fascinating because, like you said, with cop movies, usually you follow the cop because you're following the investigation. Here, I think he's less interested in investigation. He's more interested in the implications of what crime is to society.
Yeah, it's that cross-section element that gives it the sociological bent.
Yeah.
Both of you are describing a kind of change in technique that is both purposeful and multifaceted.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of the effects of that, or the applications of it, one is that, to Wilson, your point about each murder being depicted in a different way, that makes us not able to anticipate when another murder is coming. Sometimes it's going to play out within one shot. Sometimes it's going to be suggested through cuts. Sometimes it's going to be really graphically shown, like when the doctor kills her victim. And sometimes it's completely off screen.
Oh, the face.
Yeah. Oh my God. I cringe. It really skeeves me out.
I whooped a little bit. I was like, yeah,
Get him.
gross. Yeah. I was thinking about how you were saying those distant moments, like when violence occurs on screen. And I think to me, that is sort of Kurosawa's like bread and butter, like letting a crazy thing happen in a wide shot and letting you as an audience just sit and like witness this happen. Like it happens so many times in this film. Like I think the most like, I guess, uncomfortable version of that for me was when one of the victims or one of the murderers was taken to questioning, and he it was the cop, I think. Yeah, it was the cop. He like grabs like a straw and then he like draws the X on the officer at the back, and I was like, holy shit! Like I was like freaking out, and it's just like it's a static wide shot as well. It plays out like that, but I think seeing the actors like sort of switch it up in this one like long take, like especially the actor of the cop to just sort of, like you said, like flick that switch in him was so unnerving and weird, and like I'm sure like a great like acting exercise for or like yeah, it's just an acting moment. And it reminded me actually a lot of how Hamaguchi works with his actors, or his actors within a space or within a scene, and the beautiful and wacky and weird and disgusting ways that they like actors or characters can interact with each other within a shot.
And crucially, because it's a oneer and it's static and we're not editing around, you're not seeing many people's faces in that moment. It really leaves a lot up to the imagination. Even when you're seeing people's faces in this movie, you're often thinking, what are they thinking? In that particular moment that Wilson's citing, we see the face of the officer upon whom an X is being drawn. And he's like, okay.
He's freaking the fuck out.
Yeah, I'm understating it, I guess. To Ben's earlier point about the variety of style, hands down, my favorite aspect of this movie is how it makes the tearing apart of reality part of the film's grammar. And what I mean by that is that the style so drastically changes in every respect, from camera movement to shot distance to blocking to how individual scenes are edited within the scene to what motivates cuts and motivates the jump from scene to scene. And to the thing I said at the top of the episode about being confounded by how people can act terribly in the name of a gross misunderstanding they have about their surroundings. This movie walks you through the experience of not being able to recognize your surroundings. That to me is the most persuasive and effective and kind of ingenious aspect of this movie. That you get this cross-section of society, you see things as they are, you see this havoc being wrought, and by the end you can't recognize even what's happening around you. Ben says that everyone is capable of doing terrible things. Well, we're all capable of that disassociation, and that's terribly frightening.
I think the mundaneness makes it feel more dreadful, because it's not in a genre trapping. It's not fun.
No, it's not. It's really not fun.
Like with a detective movie, there's like a fun to it. Like, yeah, it's a murder, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of fun to find out who the killer is. It's kind of like a puzzle. I'm Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
But here is like, the fuck, this is real, right? And I think that really goes with the use of those long takes and this contiguity of time and space, where people are walking around their spaces rather than him cutting around too much within a space. So then everything feels very like, this is a thing that's just happening in a room, and here are the different parts of the room. And he plays a lot with blocking to reveal things in a room, whether for effect or just to be like, oh, here's more of the room. You know, the room is this big. And so there's this sense of space that is really strong with Kurosawa's films, where you know where things are, and it feels like a real place. And when it's not a real place, you also know, like when it's in that dream sequence in that bus or something, right? You know it's not a real space. But when it is a real space, it feels like a real space. And I think that's very important.
Agreed. Kurosawa talks about the importance of off-screen space and how it impacts what you see on screen. And those most disorienting moments are the ones where you don't know really what's off screen. Think of the climax of the movie in which Takabe, spoilers, shoots Mamiya in that like forest shack building,
Yeah.
which is a very scary building in its own right. Where are we? Even within the shack, what exists room to room? Why is there this psycho-ish shower curtain with a faded photograph behind it? What is this space?
Of Mesmer. Guys, I have a theory.
Okay.
Like, do you think that this guy is just Mesmer and he's never died?
Or is it like this Mamiya is the original Mesmer?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
whoever that guy is in that videotape.
This is like have zero weight. There's no weight to my question, but that's what I was thinking.
I wouldn't say it's an invalid theory. It makes sense that you would ask that kind of question. Actually, I was looking online and I was just like wondering what people are thinking about the movie because it's such a weird movie and there is no definitive answer, right?
Yeah, you can't help but wonder, right? You can't help but wonder.
What is this movie, right? So somebody was like, maybe the forest shack is a dream space. Maybe it's not real. Maybe he doesn't kill Mamiya. Maybe he kills Mamiya in his mind. And I'm like, yeah, actually, do I like this interpretation? Not necessarily, but I can understand it.
It could work.
Yeah, like if you want to read it that way, sure, of course.
On Criterion, there's a feature that's a video essay by Alexandre Philippe called There Is No Cure. And he keeps on repeating the refrain in this video essay, quote, "We're being hypnotized, aren't we?" Unquote. And he wonders in this video essay, from the point when Takabe picks up the knife in his home, do we ever return to reality from that point?
Right.
I don't care which way it is. That's immaterial because it's unanswerable. But the fact that that question exists is very significant.
It puts us as viewers in a liminal space because he's fucking with the edit. Because now you don't know what's happening. Because once he breaks away from that use of a pretty static kind of panning camera, you lose all sense of contiguity. You're like, what is reality of the movie? Maybe not what is reality for the movie, but like within this film language that he's established, you don't know when you have returned to what feels like a reality, right? Everything's just kind of crazy and nothing makes sense anymore. Like, and you're being shown things that don't make sense. Like the freaky late scene with the hospital where the nurse turns around and sees what I think is Fumie on the stretcher. Like, why? That shit freaked me out.
It's maybe the most scary like jump scare sudden thing in the movie because you're comprehending it as it's coming towards you and then it cuts away immediately.
Yeah. There's a Kurosawa film that feels like that for the whole runtime.
Ooh, which one?
It's called Barren Illusion. And I just spent the whole time watching. I was like, what's happening? Can anyone explain to me what's happening? And by the end of it, I still had no clue. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened.
Sounds like a barren illusion.
Hey. That exact sensation is what I'm talking about with the detachment from reality and how scarily cogent a presentation of that detachment this movie is. And that it can happen to you simply by watching this movie, which makes me wonder, why does Mamiya share the name of a camera brand, a Japanese camera brand?
Do you think it's intentional?
I don't know, I suppose.
So I was just poking around this man's filmography. One of his earlier films is called Sweet Home. And one of the alternate titles it's called The Mamiya House.
Ooh.
And I'm reading about this. Apparently, Sweet Home is an inspiration for the freaking video game series Resident Evil.
No way.
What?
And I'm like, what is this movie? I'm so intrigued now. Because the first Resident Evil is just set in basically what is kind of a haunted house with zombies. And so the house is evil. So it's the Mamiya house. So I don't know whether that's the link here. But similarly, just me reading this premise, the house is evil. The environment is evil.
Yeah.
How Sue? Just kidding. No, wrong link. Sorry.
I mean, that is a link, I would say. A little different, but obviously in terms of tone. But also, yes, environment is evil.
I don't know how common Mamiya is as a name.
Also, random fun fact: Sweet Home produced by Juzo Itami.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
call back. Go back and listen
Random,
to
but
our
yeah.
Juzo Itami episodes.
Yeah. I mean, okay, if we want to run this thread that you have,
I
Eli,
do.
about the camera brand, just to like as an exercise.
Let's do it.
Then film as a persuasive medium that has sparked people to do bad things throughout history. Everything from Birth of a Nation, resparking the KKK, to Leni Riefenstahl's persuasive Nazi propaganda.
To whatever the fuck Alex Garland's doing now.
He's not doing anything.
No, just kidding. That was a joke.
But it's not exactly a totally benevolent medium.
No, for sure. It is especially not. If anything, I think the moving image is, in our time, extremely insidious.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I would agree.
Like, not for evil, for capitalism. God damn.
Yeah. Well, for evil too, I would argue.
Well, capitalism is evil. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go, kids.
But yeah, I mean, we've talked about hypnotism because with Mamiya's character, he's doing it with what seems like audio suggestions, right? It's more of a audio kind of cue kind of thing that's making them maybe do
So
stuff.
podcasts are evil.
And I guess we think about, oh shit, what's a podcast?
This is capitalism.
And I think it's interesting that he likes like this kind of very laid back, detached style, but also is able to do these more subjective things because like when you go into subjective edits, that's when you're really affecting emotionally on the viewer
Yeah.
in a way that's quite not insidious, but in a way that's primal.
Yeah.
Like a quick cut makes you feel something that you might not feel by looking at the same object or subject.
It requires you to process information quickly without reflecting on it.
So it changes the way that you process the thing. And so editing and the manipulation of time can do that
Yeah.
to you. And tone or whatever. And that, which is why Mia's voice is so freaking annoying to me. Like it's like kind of that modulation of tone that just gets on your nerves because of that kind of that laziness that like gets me
Mm-hmm.
in the way that he speaks and the nonchalance of it. My God. Anyway.
I do see what you mean.
Ben could spend another hour talking about how horrible his voice is.
What I'm trying to say is this guy's a great actor.
Yeah, they're both really, really good. I think they're good foils for each
Yeah.
other.
To run this idea to some kind of extreme logical conclusion, baseless or otherwise, if Mamiya is named Mamiya on purpose, sharing a name with a camera company, then maybe film is the kind of mesmerism that it is the tool that can knock things over and turn teachers and doctors and detectives,
Mhm.
arguably protectors of society and status quo, again, arguably, into forces that destroy that social fabric. And I think that's a prescient argument.
That's what I think is interesting about the film, that it allows you to think so much about it, but it's never prescriptive
Yes, agreed.
about what it's trying to say.
Mhm.
It puts a lot of things on the table, but not in like a non-committal way. It commits to so many ideas of what's going on, but not to its kind of message, maybe. It just shows you something that's very concrete, but then you kind of
Mhm.
figure it out for yourself. Like, what is it trying to really say? What is it trying to mean? And what is it trying to say about, I guess, society? Because it obviously is trying to say something about the social fabric.
Yes, I think that's clear that it is trying to say something.
Yeah.
I think that maybe that's the difference between like that and something that I guess I have had like a problem with, which was Julia Ducournau's
Civil War.
Titan. No.
Mm.
Titan, which I feel like similarly tries to play with a lot of ideas, whether visual or thematic, but without clearly having anything to say. And I think it's quite obvious to a viewer when you are gesturing without meaning versus when you are alluding with meaning. And I think that's the power of, I guess, this film.
I think he is very clear when he's showing you all these things, because like he shows you things about mental illness, he shows you things about deviant-ish behavior,
Mm-hmm.
and so he's cueing you through these things that he is seeing in the social fabric in society and stuff like that. But he's not necessarily saying that they are doing anything or causing anything, but they're there.
Right.
And so you know that he's foregrounding these things. Or like even sometimes saying them out loud. He's a bit more maybe direct in retribution about what he's interested in. But with this one, it's a bit more oblique, which is why I think this one's so much more fascinating and more fun to go back to. And it's always such a fine line to be like oblique but not obtuse. Like it's so difficult. Because, yeah, like why is this not obtuse? It kind of is a little obtuse, but it's enough that I'm like sucked into it rather than being like, stop being lazy or like stop just not saying the thing, right? And I think Cure just happens to be in this like very nice Goldilocks zone of telling you enough.
And varying its dance moves enough while maintaining certain patterns, like the repeated kind of mechanical white noise that varies across the movie, the return of the dryer noise from Takabe's home during Oida's interrogation, the flashing railroad lights and different lights that appear, which actually, Wilson, maybe supports your point that there is something pernicious and wrong there all along that is just baked into the way civilization is built.
Could be. Or civilization is built in a Kurosawa film.
Yeah, good distinction. That's important.
I mean, I guess there's a suggestion that all these characters have little annoyances.
Yes.
That they have swallowed or tolerated. I think the only one that I don't really see is in the couple at the start. They don't really establish that something is off about the relationship, but generally, most of the characters have some kind of ill or something that they are suppressing.
Yeah, Takabe, certainly.
And yeah, we didn't really talk about Takabe's, like, I guess, suppression and also outburst when Mamiya tries to do it on him, and he's like, he wants to take ownership over his hatred of his wife, which is like sort of fucked up in that way as well.
Yeah, he's the most burdened protector figure, from the way that he believes he has to act professionally to the way he believes he has to do everything for and protect his wife at home and out in the town, to how he interacts with anyone and everyone. Dude's not living a pleasant life.
Yeah.
So
Nah, he ain't.
he kind of is perfectly coiled to become the next Mamiya, if that's what the movie is suggesting at the end.
Is this how you understand the ending?
It is.
That's how I understand the ending.
I think of what Kurosawa says about the title of the movie, Cure. Quote, "In the end, he finds real peace of mind, but in return for that peace, he probably becomes a criminal in the end. He may become an outcast, he may cause trouble for society, but in return, he may gain peace of mind. He finds solace through this harrowing experience, so we may say that he was cured." End quote.
I'm thinking now about how, because he was so burdened by all his internal turmoil, right? Because I remember now, like, when on this rewatch, I was watching Takabe's character and being like, wow, he seems so cool in terms of his attitude compared to what I usually remember Yakusho's characters are like, because they're always tormented people.
Yeah.
And then when the torment came in, I was like, oh yeah, that's his character.
That's the Yakusho I know.
And I forgot when the torment came out. And I was thinking about Mamiya's quote where he says like, what's inside of me is now outside of me. And so if for Takabe's character, for Takabe, for him to be cured is to take what's inside of him and put it outside of himself, which is why he's cured, but now the force inside of him is outside of him in other people, right? So in a way, you could kind of understand it that way. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like he's offloading what he views as his responsibility socially and as a husband and as a cop onto other people. He's going from citizen, cog, to lunatic, rebel, individual, someone who casts stones and rocks at what he sees around him rather than adheres to and protects his context.
Do you think, I'm just thinking about this now, in a weird way, it's almost like the suggestion. Like if I don't think of the Mamiya character as something supernatural, he's one guy. But maybe the suggestion is that it's so easy for bad feelings to infect other people.
Yes, I think that's exactly it.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is kind of like the issue about the social fabric. We're so easily caught up into bad feelings. And you mentioned January 6th, right? Like that's like mob mentality kind of thing. I mean, it's not really a mob thing, but like just through a simple conversation, we can like get riled up, you know? And of course, Cure is exploring an extreme version of what that looks like.
Yeah.
Where we're so suggestible to violence for like small things. And yeah, I think if anything, maybe it's not trying to say anything concrete about society, but it's just saying that, okay, you know, modern society is so connected and we're all next to each other that we can kind of just like make each other unhappy.
Again, it's pessimistic, but I think that is what the movie is arguing.
Yeah.
My final big question for us. If Cure is arguing that the structures we live in are fragile to the point of being able to implode with a tiny suggestion, I'm curious about your opinion on this. Is life and society actually that frail? And is our moment of being alive especially fragile? What do you think? Is Kurosawa right?
Honestly, yes. I'm going to go out and say yes. I think maybe it's a little like Kurosawa sort of amplifies this feeling, but it's not unfounded. And it's not like, I don't think it's that low. So I think it's quite, I don't know. I think there is a collective anxiety and a collective fear and a lot of different aspects of society, like politics or like climate change, is just aiding in the acceleration of like everyone collectively like losing their minds. This has probably been happening for centuries, but it feels like at this point right now, as an international world, we are somewhat fucked in many ways. So I think like a filmmaker like Kurosawa is someone whose work is very appropriate for, I think, this current time in our history.
If I may be even more pessimistic than Kurosawa himself.
Let's go.
I think the suggestion here, if you look at Takabe's character, like when he becomes the next Mamiya, if you want to think of it that way, he has a justifiable reason. And it's because of an anguish within him. It's something sad for him that he has to output his anger out into the world. He's not doing it for a gain, he's doing it for relief. Okay? That's an argument here. But I think what we are going through right now is targeted. And I do feel like the collective is being used by a small number of not of the collective. That it's a bit more insidious. Like it benefits somebody. It's not just about relief. You know, it's not just anger because we are stuck. You know, we are doing crazy things in a way directed by people who can control what we are doing. We are susceptible to suggestions that come from somewhere, not just like random like social fervor. It comes from somewhere. It has a objective that we might not understand. And I feel that way more nowadays. Like a bit sounds a little like, oh, fucking Illuminati, right?
No.
But I do really think like we are a little blind, I think, to what is happening, that we don't understand sometimes like what we do as individuals feed into like what is happening outside us, because we don't see how the small thing that we're doing is moving the needle somewhere else.
Yep.
If you know what I mean. Like with Cure, it's a little bit random. It's just kind of within this town. It's affecting specific people. But it never goes out into like suggesting that, oh, you know, like that is the fabric of the world as a globe. You know what I mean? But now we're even more connected than the time that Cure was made, for sure.
Yeah.
And so now I think you can extrapolate that to more connected communities from across the world.
Yeah.
What a fun podcast.
Yeah, right? So I do agree with you both. And also, to me, the antidote to all this, not to use something too close to the word for cure, which Kurosawa is very much so, I think, deploying ironically. I think the antidote to that very large problem is local community building and trust in the people immediately around you and getting to know the people immediately around you. This is one of the things that I love about working in a school, is that even when it's fraught, as every community is at points, there's a fundamental alignment of purpose, and that purpose is caring for each other and looking towards something more positive coming down the pipeline. Now, even if that more positive thing is not coming, there still exists the possibility for local communities to self-determine and make their own brighter thing, even if it's reactive to something bad in a larger context. I have both the cynical belief of this movie and I think a hope and a trust in individual relationships that Kurosawa is skeptical of.
I think it's interesting that you said that because I think that sort of brings up to me the fact that, like the way that Kurosawa's films work within this Japanese context, because in East Asia, I guess there's, well, I know, just speaking specifically about Japan, there is this, I guess, this vibe of of not being a very collectivist kind of like, it's a very individualist kind of like society, I would say, especially in the cities. And I think like modern life in Japan can be very like isolating.
Mm.
And I think the cinema that Kurosawa brings, or the version of Kurosawa's cinema, likes to sort of like highlight that or use that to our advantage, because you sort of
Definitely.
see how these folks, like once they're in a couple, right, they're in that unit, they're sort of like isolated in that unit, and Mamiya takes advantage of that, these very tight units, and breaks them.
Yeah. But like Takabe doesn't have friends. Like he doesn't have a local community. He lives in the big Tokyo with people who he doesn't know. He has his isolated home life with Fumie. And he has Sakuma who he works with, and they seem chummy. But there's a medium zone of actual community where people know each other that doesn't exist in the world of Kurosawa.
I was thinking about what you were saying about local community building, and also I think, yes, I presented a very pessimistic worldview about how the collective ill will can lead to disastrous possible targeted objectives, but also the inverse is true. Like collective goodwill can also do a lot of things. It's hard to see how your thing will become part of the big thing, whether it's bad or good.
Yeah. Yep.
But just do your good in your corner and just cross your fingers that it's going to cascade from there is maybe the best thing I think about right now.
Well, we'll be putting this theory to the test again with the arguably far more bleak Pulse, my deep cut pick for Kurosawa, in our next episode.
Are we doing more than Pulse? What's the plan here?
I would love to bring one forward if you guys want. And I think,
Please, yeah, I want to watch more of him.
I'm realizing actually I can do Tokyo Sonata actually. Because actually that's people really like Tokyo Sonata.
We're doing a mega. Yes.
Let's do 4 again.
we do 4.
Because these are all great movies, actually.
Awesome.
And yours is Ends of the Earth.
Yeah,
also.
To the Ends of the Earth, I think, I don't know, I think it deals with very different themes, but the approach is in classic Kurosawa fashion. And it's also a modern, I guess, one of his latest ones. So I can maybe, if you want to bring Sonata, I can end with To the Ends of the Earth, so we can sort of go a little chronologically.
Actually, that's a very good slice because Kyo and Pulse are thrillers in very different veins. Like, Pulse is not a cop movie, and then Sonata is a domestic movie. Ends of the Earth is this travel movie. It's a really interesting slice.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
Thank you, Eli.
Sorry, who are you guys?
Thank you guys. And I'm honestly really looking forward to seeing different types of Kurosawa movies too.
Who's Kurosawa?
Stop.
It's so easy. It's so annoying.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. We also now have a Patreon, which is the best way to support us. If you want to do that, we would deeply appreciate it. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials we've mentioned here. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. This episode was edited by Buchar, and our cover art is designed by Justina Yam. Our theme song is composed by me, Eli Sands.
I'm Wilson. Who are you?
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.